This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 235 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Peggy Singleman, host of Virginia Homegrown, all about spring pruning tips. The plant profile is on Horsetail, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on the Great Plant Swap Mishap by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Peggy Singleman, host of Virginia Homegrown on VPM PBS TV, and we're talking all about spring pruning tips. Welcome back, Peggy.
Well, thank you, Kathy. Thank you for having me back.
So we had Peggy on way back in February, episode 228 on reducing runoff with rain gardens. And that was such a popular episode. I thought we'd have Peggy back to talk about one of her other passions, which is correct pruning. Right, Peggy? And I'd ask you, as I do most returning guests, what has been going on in your life or business since the last time you were on. But it hasn't been that long.
It hasn't been, but still, it's springtime, so I've been out in the garden, but I've also been doing a lot of speaking engagements, which I love, getting out and talking to fellow gardeners about what's happening and what they can do in their gardens, and just so many topics to share.
Same, and spring has sprung, and spring makes people think they need to get out there and start sawing at things.
Exactly.
Because there are things, it's out of control really fast. Everything jumps into bloom and leaves out so quickly that we feel like we have to jump in and control all of that. Let's talk about some of those tendencies and how to address that.
Yes, of course. Well, I think the very first thing we need to do is to look at our tools and to make sure they're sterilized because they've been sitting in the shed. They might be a little rusted. Maybe put a little steel wool to them and to sharpen them a little. Working with sharpened tools is the best way to go because then you're working the tool. The tool is not working you. There's a big difference there. A little WD-40 and also sterilizing. I use 91% or 70% isopropyl rubbing alcohol to spray down my tools to actually sterilize them. And I do this between plants to make sure I'm not transferring any insects or diseases from one plant to the other. So that's my very first let's go. It's kind of let's go, but stop. Let's take care of our tools first. And then get my gloves on and get my safety glasses on because you never know. Something's going to whack you in the face. And get out there.
And what I do is, those alcohol swab pads you get in first aid kits, you can buy those in bulk. I keep a few of those in my pocket to do between each shrub, as you say.
Yes, that's another good option to do it. Excellent. Some people have used Clorox. Clorox actually harms the metal of your pruning tool, so don't use, I'll say, bleach, not Clorox, but please don't use bleach. Use the isopropyl rubbing alcohol. It's better for your equipment.
I would say the bleach is going to eat away at the metal eventually and put pits in it, so not the best thing if you got really good high-quality tools, which does bring us to your tool choices. What are your favorites, Peggy?
I'm a Felco person for hand tools. I'm a Silky person for saws, and I like to find a lopper that has a nice weight for me, but also has a complete shaft from the tip of the pruning or cutting edge down to the handle. Also, I have 2 or 3 different sizes of loppers, long-handled loppers, because some are for smaller branches, smaller diameter branches, and others are for wider diameter branches. I avoid all tools that are kind of anvil that have a flat, I'll say bottom, and then you put the sharp blade down because that pinches what we're trying to make a clean cut of, unless it's hyper sharp, which we all know they're not. I use secateurs or scissor type pruning tools.
Yeah, I would say that the blades should pass each other when they make a cut, as with a regular pair of scissors. And when you're referring to the anvil, it's kind of crushing them between two. And those used to be the old-fashioned favorites were for some reason the anvil kind.
And on saws, I have a small little hand saw and I have a longer hand saw. And you have to understand with our pruning saws, most of them cut on the pull, not the push. So in that motion of when you're pruning, don't put a lot of force. Again, don't work the tool. Let the tool do the work. Understand that more than likely it's on the pull. You can read about your tool, but 90% of hand saws cut better on the pull than they do on the push.
And so true. Yeah, so true about the right tool for the right job. It makes things so much easier. Like when you finally have that right tool, that right pair of loppers or balanced hand pruners, how much easier it is to do the pruning.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of loppers and pruning, look at your loppers and look at your hands. And if your dominant hand is the right hand, have that sharper cutting blade be manipulated or worked with your right hand. So many people don't take a second and look at the tools that they're picking up and saying, I need to orient this the other way because I want that cutting blade in my right hand because I'm right hand dominant, or left if you're left hand dominant. But put the cutting blade in the proper hand, the stronger hand, so that again, you're not working too hard to get this task done.
And I think a lot of people find sharpening their tools very daunting because they were never taught the proper way. They weren't a Girl Scout like I was, and probably you were too, Peggy.
Correct.
I'm going to guess you were.
On my own.
So you can take it to professionals to have your tools sharpened, and you can watch them do it, and you can have somebody demonstrate it for you at a tool sharpening event as well.
Truly, truly. But also read the directions that came with your hand clippers, because many of them do have instructions. And many of them are actually manufactured or constructed or designed with this little knob on the end of the cutting blade. And that knob is your guide for your sharpener. And so read those directions. Don't just take it out of the package and throw everything else away. In those directions, they'll teach you. This is not rocket science. We can do this. Everybody can do this. It just takes a sharpening stone, which you can buy at your local hardware store, and some of them have handles, and just reading the directions on the package of the product you bought.
Now, Peggy, I have to confess, I'm the type of person who leaves my tools out in the weather.
Oh.
Yes. So they might get a little rust, as you said, knock it off with some steel wool. But I also find a little bit of lubricating oil helps too.
Absolutely, because you're talking to a person who has her tools in her house. Not even in the garage. They're in my house. They're very important to me.
Yeah, I keep my favorite ones in a bag inside, but all the rest, get chucked where they are. And of course, when I need them, they're, stiff and very hard to open at that point when you left them outside over the winter.
How funny. At least you didn't find them in your compost pile months later.
No, but they probably would be in better shape then because they wouldn't be as exposed to the oxygen in the air.
That's very true. Maybe the microbes ate the rust off.
So good thing, one of my tips is always to paint the handles if they don't come with a bright handle color, because of that very thing, right? We set it down, we get called away, we get busy, we forget the tool is out there, we don't see it again. So out of sight, out of mind.
And it's gone.
Hopefully not with the yard waste bag. And so let's turn to the timing. So it is the beginning of spring. Everybody wants to get out there and shape things and make little meatballs or little hedges. So what are your thoughts on that, Peggy?
I say slow down. You've got to know the plant you're dealing with. If it's a spring flowering plant, azaleas, rhododendrons, then you don't want to prune that, because the flower buds that we are going to enjoy shortly were actually formed last fall. Even the cherry tree blossoms that we're enjoying, the blossoms of all those spring flowering plants were formed last late summer or fall. So if we go gung-ho pruning right now, we're going to prune off all those beautiful flowers. So spring flowering shrubs and small trees, you want to wait until after they bloom to prune them. Okay? Summer flowering shrubs like our hydrangeas and things, you can prune those now. the early spring bloom because they're going to form their flowers on new growth. Alrighty. And so you've got to think about, well, what's the delineation between spring and summer, Peggy? It's about May. May kind of ends at about mid-May. And from there, you're rolling into the summertime. But the other thing you have to note, and this always gives people a scare, is to know what kind of plant you have. I mean, who is it? It's a hydrangea, but which one?
Mm-hmm.
And so many people, in these days you can take a picture with your phone, go to an app, and you can find out what it is. I'm old school in this respect because of all my professional public gardening experience at Maimon over all those decades. Is record keeping. But I now have a shoebox, and I take whatever plant I purchase, I take the tag off, I write the date on the tag, and I throw it in my shoebox. I now have in my shoebox a record of what I've just planted in my yard. And about once a year, or sometimes every 2 years, I pull out the shoebox and take out what died, because things die. And then I put them in my what's called the deaccession file, or the dead plant shoebox. And this way, if I pull it out, sometimes I look at that to say, wait a minute, which one did I kill? Oh, I don't want to get that one again. So once you really know what you have, either through your plant record files, which could be as simple as a shoebox. I abhor spreadsheets, Kathy. I had to deal with so many of them for so many years. So I avoid them. So shoebox works great. Or an app. But once you know what you have a better idea of how to prune it.
And we'll get into some of those particulars in a little bit, but first we'll start with some basics. So when you're looking at a shrub or tree in your garden, how do you know even if it needs pruning?
Well, I look at it closely and I go, does it have any dead wood? And I remove the dead wood, no matter when it blooms. Is there anything dead in there? And I'm not getting down to the teeny tiny little twiggy stuff. That'll fall off. Don't waste your time doing that. But the dead wood, the major dead branches, may be left over from the winter. It's been an erratic winter with hot and cold. The other thing I do is I look, are any of the branches crossed and rubbing? Because we don't want branches to rub, because that exposes, the cambium underneath, which is the part of the plant where all the action flows up and down from the roots to the shoot and from the shoot back down to the roots. So we don't want that to be exposed. We want that protective bark to be in place. And so if there's anything crossing, rubbing, then I remove the weaker of the two. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then once I get those two things down, which hopefully are just a quick check, I look down into the plant. And what I do is, looking at the base of the plant, I want to improve some of the air circulation, but I don't want to do what's called lion's tailing, which means take away all the growth on the stem, just leaving the tip. Think of that tail of the lion coming off the lion's body, and then you have that brown fluff at the end. You don't want to prune like that. You need those side shoots along that stem to help pull the moisture and the nutrients up from the roots up to the leaves, okay, and vice versa. And the other thing is, and this goes for trees, shrubs, perennials, is that as our temperatures rise and it gets to 90 degrees, the outer leaves of a tree and a shrub stop photosynthesizing. It gets too hot. But they then shade the interior leaves, which can continue to make energy for the plant. So if you clean out the interior and make it nice and pristine, you've eliminated the plant's ability to support itself during hot weather, which here in Virginia and along the mid-Atlantic can be quite a number of months that we're above 90. So I look down into the bottom of the plant, and I'm like, is there anything that I can just, 1 or 2 clips, that's all, 1 or 2 snips to help open up air circulation without, totally opening up or removing the branching and the potential leaves on the inside of the plant. Does that make sense?
And when you're talking about removing those, you're making the cut all the way down to the trunk of the plant?
I am, but I'm not making a flush cut. Flush cuts are a thing of the past. And we have since learned through true research. Alex Shigo did a lot of research on this, and he learned by watching plants in the woods, truly, that a branch actually doesn't end at the trunk. It actually stops becoming a branch a distance out from the trunk, usually a couple of inches, depending on the size of the branch. Alrighty, so we're talking shrubs here. I usually leave a 1-inch stub from that trunk because it's kind of difficult to determine where the trunk ends or the main branch ends and the side one begins. So I err on on the side of caution, knowing that if I left a 1-inch stub, the plant will take care of itself, and that will be shed within a year.
Yeah, there's a lot of illustrations online of that branch collar where the branch, and it's kind of really evident in some varieties and cultivars or shrubs. It'll be a really wrinkled area, and I always compare it to the little web between your thumb and forefinger.
Yeah.
That kind of looks like what that branch collar. But others, it's really hard to tell where that branch collar is because it's so smooth.
Yes.
And you don't want to cut too much into that because that's where the plant is going to heal over the wound.
Yes, and we have to use the word seal, not heal. Humans heal, plants seal. And the other thing is what we've learned through Dr. Scheiko's research is that in that branch bark ridge, it's called, are actually some hormones that any rot coming from the branch to the trunk or is going to be contained by those hormones. Plants are very smart, and so they're able to then contain that. And if we do a flush cut, we've actually eliminated that part of the tree or shrub that can compartmentalize that rot to be outside of the operation of the plant. And so we as humans know we've got to listen to nature. And so I tend to leave, and I look at a measuring yardstick or something to remind myself how small an inch is. It's not much. All right. We all need little reminders. Oh, it only needs to be an inch. So yes, magnolia tree is an easy one to see, but for shrubs and such, as you said, it's difficult.
So you talked about sealing, not healing the wounds, which brings up, Peggy, one practice that has pretty much gone away, but I still see it crop up every once in a while, which is people painting over the wounds or the open cuts that they do on a branch or on a shrub or a tree.
Oh, that breaks my heart when I see that. It really does, because it just shows me the person doing that just hasn't been up with the times. Another point that we need to help people remember is that the tree will seal itself. The woody plant, the shrub, will seal itself. You don't have to paint it with anything. And what these products or even paint does is it actually forms a barrier that's waterproof. And it contains the moisture in the plant. It contains the rot in the plant, and it causes more damage than good. I mean, we want to put a Band-Aid on it, face it. We were thinking, oh, we need to put a coating on this because we do that to ourselves. And we can't. We have to understand the plant knows what it's doing. It's been doing this for millions of years. It's been taking care of itself. So if we do the proper cut and allow the plant to do what it does best, then everything will be better than what we can make it without. I was going to say.
I mean, Mother Nature for thousands of years wasn't, painting the cuts. When a deer came along and ate a branch or broke off in a storm.
So let it be. It makes it easier for us. It's one less product. It's one less step. And you're going to keep the plant longer. It'll be healthier.
The biggest challenge that a lot of listeners and my readers or at my talks ask about, which is rejuvenation pruning. They've either moved into a home with something huge, overgrown, a big old rhododendron or something that's gotten out of control, or they've just let it go for several years themselves.
Yes, and this is a hard concept for people to grasp because they want to get in there and cut it at 3 feet because they want the plant to be 3 feet tall. And they don't realize from wherever they make the cut, the plant's going to grow from there. And then it becomes this endless cycle of cutting it back to 3 feet, and when it's a 10-foot plant. And what we need to understand is, again, right plant, right place. But many times we've inherited a landscape, like you just mentioned. And what we can do is called rejuvenation pruning. And it takes a few years to do it one way, or it's more immediate another way. The way I like to do it is to look at the plant and to make what I call windows. Take out branches to give me, depending on the size, but anywhere from 2-inch to 8-inch windows of openness to allow the sunshine down into the interior of the plant. When the sunshine strikes the stems, it will initiate growth, and you'll start getting growth from the inside of the plant, which is what you want. So you go ahead the first year and you make a number of windows, we'll call it. Make sure they're all around the plant. And don't be stingy. Don't be too crazy. I say a third, all righty? And you want to think of that mass and go, I'm going to have a third of this be windows to get that sun in. And then the next year, you can remove another third of the tall branches and work at getting more sun inside. And then the final year, you can remove the remaining third of branches. And you'll have a nice plant already to take its place. And it'll be like, oh, that looks nice. That's done it really well. The other method, still it's going to be a multi-year method in the long run, but people can come with most plants. You can cut them right down at the bottom. And because of all of that energy in those roots, they will start to sprout back out and start to grow. And usually within 3 years, you've got a nice plant again. So it depends on whether somebody wants to take the leap and cut it down, or if they want to do it more slowly. So it's a little bit more of an aesthetic process. Some people with neighbors would prefer the first choice of removing a third, making those windows, and then removing the next third, making bigger windows, and then finally removing that last third. And don't be shy. It's okay. It's a plant. You're going to be okay.
Yeah, and I think if anything, most people make the mistake of taking too much away.
Oh.
And you get really up into there. It's almost a Zen process. You're cutting. You need to step back.
Yes. I say walk away. When you're about ready to go, oh, one more. That's when you have to stop, pause, and say, it'll be here for the next time. Walk away. And it takes, first time you do it, you're like, oh, wow, but I want to go back. But then after that, you go, no, it's the right thing. People generally don't want to remove, unless they're doing rejuvenation pruning, you don't want to remove more than 25% of the mass of a plant. Because then you'll start getting suckers coming up from the roots. You'll start getting water sprouts coming off from the shoots. Because as I mentioned, all those roots in the soil have energy in them. And all that energy has to go somewhere. It's not a bank vault where it just sits there. It's gotta. The plant's processes are going to kick in and up it's going to come. And whether it comes up and grows where you want it to grow, or whether it says, hey, I've got to make excess growth because I've got too much energy. And maybe a storm knocked a huge piece off, or maybe somebody got overzealous with pruning. It's going to come out somewhere. So I'd much rather walk away at 25%. And it's a judgment call, so it's better to judge on the low side than on the high side. You can come back and do more at another time, meaning months from now, not weeks.
Yeah. So. And I was going to bring up storm damage, because that can take off a huge chunk of something, and then you're just trying to balance it in that case and repair what you can.
Absolutely. And if it's a really large chunk, know that the plant is going to start sending up suckers from the base as well as sprouts from the roots. And so you've got to understand that. So you can actually start do some guidance pruning. And to do some guidance pruning, you want to it's hard if it's a large section. You've just got to wait for it to start sending up the suckers and then removing some as the plant continues to grow on. Not over the course of a season, but over the course of a few years, selecting the strongest ones to continue to grow and leaving and continually cutting the smaller ones. Okay. But maybe it's a branch that broke off in the middle of the branch. And what you have to do, particularly if it's a shrub, look for those nodes where the leaves are attached. Those have little buds inside of them, and those shoots can actually, the direction they're pointing is the direction the growth is going to go. So if they're pointing out away from the plant, which is the center of the plant, which is what we want, then prune to that bud. If it's growing into the plant, try to find a bud along that stem where it's growing out away from the center of the plant. Because remember, we just removed all crossing and rubbing wood. We just went in and removed 1 or 2 branches that were, I'll say, preventing good air circulation down in the bottom of that point. Mm-hmm. So we want to redirect our growth to have it grow out toward the exterior of the plant. Yeah, and that's super important in shrubs like roses, and much more evident in some of those, like we talked about with the branch collar being much more visible on magnolias. I think on roses and some shrubs, you can really see where that growth node is. And pick an outward facing one and cut there. Whereas some other shrubs, you really have to run your finger along to feel the bumps. Exactly. Yes. And even along walkways, we tend to grab the shears and just go to town, just running up and down the plant along the walkways. If you were to take a moment and grab your hand clippers instead and to start pruning to buds growing sideways, parallel to the walkway, mm-hmm. You'll start finding that you're going to be able to directionally prune that plant, and it will be much healthier than this continually pruned stub that only has 2 inches of growth on it because it's just been pruned so much. We all know that plant, it's all these branches inside and it's got 2 inches where the homeowner, or even the corporate center maintenance person has pruned it back to the exact same spot. And that poor little plant's trying to survive. You can almost sit on it too. I actually put my clipboard. I was at a client's house and I just put my clipboard on it. It didn't even move. My clipboard's pretty thick and the plant didn't even move. I was making a point to the homeowner. We started doing rejuvenation pruning, making windows and getting growth down into the center of that plant so that we could cut off that pancake of growth up at the top. And he laughed because he said, okay, point taken, Peg.
Yeah, it's usually in older hedges. I see that a lot in boxwoods where it's got nice green, glossy growth right in the first inch or so. But then when you look inside, it's just dead.
It's completely dead. Yeah, because there's no sun getting in. It's this thick mat of growth from continually pruning it back to the same point, and it's hard. We have to understand that plants can do their best, survive winter storms, survive the ice that we're all starting to encounter more, if it has good structural growth, not that super thick layer, I'll call it just greenery on the top. So we have to think year round for these things. They are living organisms, okay?
And speaking of which, and on hedging, there's that habit that we have of making an angle from the top inward down to the bottom so that the top of the shrub is shading the bottom of the shrub. And that's the exact opposite of what we want to be doing. But that's all of us tend to do that when we're pruning. It's something about the human body and our balance.
It really is. And it's hard to do this, but here's the thoughts. If you think about it and you look at a shrub, that's an inverted pyramid, okay? Point down at the ground, the top being wider, shades. And so we end up with nothing down at the bottom. We have this growth at the top, growth coming down the sides, but then it gets to the point where it stops and we have a bare bottom. All righty. But if we could invert that triangle and not have it be so severe, all you need is a 1 degree difference from the top to the bottom, with the bottom being 1 degree further out than the top. When the sun strikes it, the sun will strike on the entire plant from top to bottom, and you'll get growth down in the bottom. And then you'll have this full, nice evergreen shrub that you're striving for, and it will look so sharp. But I know it's hard because we have our clippers, whatever tool we're using, we're coming across, we're coming down, and then by nature, our dominant arm is pushing that tool in at the bottom. And you really have to take your thought process and say, no, I'm not going in, and carry it down, keeping it out and making that 1 degree angle. I make a 2 or 3 degree angle. It's a very slight angle, but I find 1 degree is too hard. So I need a little bit more of a pronounced angle for my brain to stay. Don't go in, don't go in, don't go in, go straight out, Peggy. Keep that angle, keep on going down, keep that angle. And it's night and day how your plants will respond. There's, hedges in professional public gardens all over, and the professionals are working hard and the greenery goes down to the bottom of the plant. And you can tell when it's made into a light bulb or an upside down triangle that the person has not really known what they were doing.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Groundcover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf, and which plants are the best ones for the job. Groundcover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn, or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Groundcover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Groundcover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
I have a huge pet peeve, Peggy, about the skirt of hollies and some of the huge magnolias that's been removed.
Oh,
I like to see the greenery all the way to the ground, thick and full, and it's so much healthier for the plant. They can withstand, like, as you said, ice storms, snowstorms, much better. You don't get all that breakage.
absolutely. And you have to understand, once the deed is done, it's done. Because it's the nature of the critter of the bark. You know, when you have true bark on a tree or an old shrub, and you are working at pruning this, and it then becomes exposed, and it becomes, and with age, it gets woodier, more corky, it's called. Those buds that are latent underneath that bark, it's going to take a lot to promote new growth out. It's just not going to throw a new branch at the bottom, you know, because all of a sudden it's getting air and light, and it goes, oh, somebody limbed me up, I'm going to start throwing growth out. Not every plant's going to do that. Like we just mentioned, our magnolias and our hollies. And so the deed is done, and you've got this exposed base when it makes this beautiful skirt, as you said, all the way down to the ground. And I love it because then it hides all the holly leaves, it hides all the magnolia leaves. You can throw everything underneath there and create a great ecosystem for those plants to continue to thrive.
Absolutely. And I don't get the question I always get about what to plant under my evergreens. You're not supposed to be.
Yeah, really.
They
Go
should
to the woods.
Yeah, I was like, they are supposed to be down to the ground. But yes, once they've been limbed up, you're pretty much not going to be able to recover from that. And then you will need some type of ground cover or to be cleaning up the leaf litter underneath or maintaining that area.
Yes. And whatever you do, please check the Virginia invasive species list or the Maryland or wherever you are. Check your state's invasive species list to make sure you don't choose things like English ivy or Vinca minor or Vinca major or another plant that is on almost every invasive species list here on the East Coast. So be aware and be different.
Let's spotlight some particular plants that are pruning challenges for a lot of people. And because it's blooming right now outside my window, I'm going to start with Forsythia.
This is a plant, again, here we have a perfect example of spring blooming plant. And it's one that can have very erratic growth. You know, there's different cultivars. Some of them are a little more tame and well-behaved than others. But most of us have Linwood Gold because it's a very popular Forsythia that came out a number of decades ago, I think in the early 1900s. And it's a plant, because it blooms in the spring, you want to prune it after it blooms. But I ask you to look at the structure of this plant. It is a soft, weepy growing kind of plant. It grows up and then it weeps down a little. It's very graceful. But yet we here in the United States make these into boxes, squares, truly light bulbs, because again, we prune down, you know, swinging in at the bottom, and they really truly look like light bulbs when they're in bloom. But we need to be aware to, you know, let this plant grow in its natural state. And it's a gorgeous plant for the landscape. It's a nice rounded habit. I have them here at my house. I inherited them, and thankfully the previous homeowner did not prune them, so they're beautiful. And when they're in bloom, they're just spectacular. But after it blooms, I go in and I look for deadwood. I look for crossing and rubbing wood. And I look for anything that's growing. I'll take a branch out if it's growing into a neighboring shrub that I don't want the Forsythia to grow into. But other than that, I truly leave it alone. Now, I understand some people have been pruning them forever and ever, and they have a choice. You can, you know, do the rejuvenation pruning, as we mentioned, or a choice of either cutting it down to the ground or, you know, taking it by thirds over a course of many years to initiate growth. But this fast-growing shrub responds well to whatever you do to it. Just breaks my heart to see them in squares when they're beautiful shrubs.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Forsythia hedging myself just because you don't get that beautiful flowering from, I call it stem to stern, that you get when you prune it correctly. And one of my favorite ways to prune it, Peggy, is to take some of those wands and use them for a Easter tree inside or for arrangements.
That's a great idea. I actually like to cut them and bring them in January and force them in a vase. And I get flowers in my house in February, and I love it. You know, it's like happy yellow flowers telling me spring is coming. It's February. You can do this. March is on its way.
And Forsythia is one of the easiest to force ones for beginners. I think quince is another great choice. If you've not forced branches from shrubs before, that's another great one to try out.
Yes, yes. On quince is, people call it japonica. I have no idea. Japonica means of Japan. So there's a lot of plants of Japan in our environment. But flowering quince, just wonderful plant. Great early spring blooming. But it only blooms for 2 weeks and then that's it. So it's not my first choice, but many people have them. And because of that, we don't want to be disrespectful of those. So let them be. It's another one that grows by itself perfectly fine. It doesn't need our help. It knows what shape to grow in. It's not going to go crazy wild.
And that does bring up, as you mentioned before, right plant, right place. So doing your research, because, one type of Forsythia could be a dwarf. Another type could be a tall, narrow one. So you want to actually know what the shape is that it's supposed to be.
Yes. I like Sugar Baby. It's a Forsythia. And I really like that. It's a little one. I use it a lot in my landscapes. And it gives you that touch of yellow, and it's a nice, well-behaved little plant. And it works out very well. And you don't have to prune it, but you get that beautiful yellow. You can even put it in a border. It's so small. So, look around. You'd be surprised what's out there, in our garden centers. And ask. Ask when you go. Go to a professionally owned garden center and ask for, what types of Forsythia can you get for me? And you'd be surprised what you can learn. Be happy to show you or tell you. Let me pull out the catalog.
Yeah, and a lot of them that I know of that are bred to be dwarf, they can have what's called a sport, right? Mm-hmm. So there might be a reversion and that will need to be pruned out if you want to keep it as a dwarf.
Absolutely. That goes for all dwarfs. Matter of fact, I have up in the front, I have a dwarf abelia. The deer don't eat abelia at my house. And I noticed just a week ago that I've got a sport. It's reverting back to its mature full size. So it's this huge piece of growth coming out of it. I was like, where did that come from? Obviously, it grew that way last year, not over the winter. So I'm going to go in and with my sharpened clippers that I have sterilized, I'm going to follow that down into the body of the plant at the bottom of that stem and make my cut down there to cut that out. And I'm going to just keep at this because I've got to force the plant to stay dwarf. I have to force it to stay in that way. It's just not going to stay on its own. But now that I know every few months I'll just go and check. Just keep cutting it back.
I think that's also good with variegated introductions because those will often revert back. All of a sudden you'll see a branch come out that's the plain green again. So you need to cut that out or that will become the dominant again. So it's good to walk around and look at your shrubs and make sure. Sometimes though, Peggy, you get a sport that's kind of cool though.
Yeah, you do. And then you can propagate it and have your own cool plant.
I think Japanese maples are kind of famous for doing that. Like all of a sudden there'll be one branch that's totally different than the rest.
Exactly. And that's really how these new plants come about because a nurseryman sees them, they propagate them. They have to go through certain test period to make sure it comes true, that it wasn't just a viral infection that's caused the sport. But then they, if it passes jumps through all the hoops, many times it's introduced as a new plant. It's called witch's brooming, and it's a distortion of the buds. And for some reason, the chromosomes have gone a little crazy from many different reasons. One of them could be viral, which means that it's not going to be introduced because the virus is unstable. But I've got a loblolly pine here in my yard that's got this huge ball of green at the end of one of its branches. And at first I thought it was a squirrel's nest, but here it's been 10 years and the ball of green is just getting bigger and bigger. And it's 40 feet up off of the ground. I can't climb up there and get it. But I just know that genetically some real cool stuff's going on up there and I can't reach it.
Yeah, I think a lot of evergreens, you'll notice at least one branch will be a little bit different. Those are cool. So let's talk about another plant that people have a lot of questions about pruning, and that's clematis.
Yes. Clematis is another one that it's very important to save that tag when you get it because there's 3 different classifications of clematis. One of them is where you prune the plant early in the spring down to the ground before it blooms. Another one is when after it blooms, you prune it down to the ground to rejuvenate growth. And then there's the other one where while it's blooming, while it's growing, you're cutting out the dead wood and doing some directional pruning, and that's it. So if you think they all get cut down to the ground, you have a 1 in 3 chance of it blooming, because you don't, number two, pruning after it blooms, you've just cut off all the buds again, as we mentioned. Where if you also have the one where you just prune as needed, taking out the deadwood, again, you've cut off all the flower buds. So you've got to know what you have. And on that tag, it's going to say Roman numeral 1 or 2 or Roman numeral 3. And that will tell you. You can Google those if you can't remember to make sure. It even says on the tag how to prune it. And you can read the tag and save it. Even if you don't care what name it is, just so that you know which type that you have. So you can have big, beautiful flowers every year. And you can impress your neighbors with your knowledge too. Oh, I have a class 2 clematis.
So we did have a GardenDC podcast with a Clematis Expert, and we talked extensively about those different classes and pruning groups. So I'll link to that in the show notes for this episode too.
Oh, please do. I'm sure whoever you spoke with knows far more about clematis than I do.
Mm-hmm.
The lime, we have to lime it in acidic soils. They want to have their roots cool, so you shade the roots with a rock or something. I mean, there's so many little details in growing a clematis, but pruning is a big one. So save that tag. And if not, bring the bloom into your local, family-owned garden center and ask, what type do I have? They have resources to help you, but listen to that podcast, please.
And so next on the list that a lot of people struggle with, boxwood.
Yes. Well, first we have to set that there's American boxwood and that there's English boxwood. And although it says American, it's not native to America, okay? But to be able to tell the difference, I always tell people to go up and look at the leaf. And our American starts with the letter A, which comes up kind of a triangle. We all know that. If you look at the leaf and it has sort of a point to it, you have an American boxwood. If it has a rounded edge, a rounded tip to the leaf, typically it's an English style boxwood, okay? And the biggest difference is the rate of growth. American boxwoods, Boxus fruticosa, can grow up to 6 inches in a year, where English boxwood, Boxus fruticosa varieties fruticosa, typically grow about 1, maybe 2 inches a year. Completely different rates of growth. And so American boxwood also become much larger, and it's a more open, slightly more open plant, where English boxwood are very tight. It's a kind of plant you can put your clipboard on again. And though some do grow larger, basically they just go more like pillowy, larger and tighter, to the point that if you take your hands and rub it on the plant, it doesn't move much. It's very stiff. And that's what we want to make sure we, again, get our clippers out and cut out little sections. I try to cut out little 2 and 3 inch windows throughout the boxwood, again, to get that sunshine down there, but also to get it looser so we can get air in there, so we don't end up with some of the insects and disease problems that English boxwood are known for. It's not just taking care of the soil that's eminently important with boxwood, but also being able to get that air in. And the American boxwood, if you end up with it getting very overgrown, they're easy to cut down and start over again with a strong rejuvenation prune. I'll call it a severe prune if you don't want to go through the task of making windows. But both of them respond very well to it. Understand, one grows much faster, a little looser, one grows much tighter, and it's much slower, that English boxwood. And it's hard. It really is hard. But I'm going to add in one more thing. All of these boxwoods have so many different types of varieties and cultivars that grow in different sizes and different shapes that there's no reason to try to take a boxwood that grows in a round shape and try to make it into another shape. So, do your boxwood homework.
Yeah, and I've seen so many historic homes and places where they're doing a severe, as you say, rejuvenation planting, where they've taken it almost down to the ground because it's been decades of overgrowth. Yeah.
Yes, and they don't jump into that lightly. As a horticulturalist of a historic site my whole career, up until a few years ago, there's a lot of thought and discussion is put into that. It's not a willy-nilly decision, because the question is, do you limb them up when they get that large, or do you cut them down and start them over? And it comes down to the design intent of the garden and how it was planned by the owner or the architect, landscape architect or designer who, originally designed the garden. What was the intent of those plants? And so it's not just done. And you have to think in your yard, what's the intent of this plant? Is it an anchor plant at the end of a border or something? Or if it's that large and I've inherited it, can I limb it up and plant underneath it? Never discount that choice. And that's a good first choice if you're unsure. limb them up, pull them up about 4 or 5 feet. We're talking really big boxwood, and plant underneath and see how that goes. And I go, this isn't working for me. I'm going to cut it down and then give it the nurture and love, I'll say, to get it to grow back very strong.
Great advice. And I think we'll finish out this episode with some native shrubs that people have a lot of questions about pruning. I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball, Peggy, and say Callicarpa, the American beautyberry.
Oh, I love that shrub. I grow it at my house. The deer leave it alone. I feel like knocking on wood. But this is a plant blooms about May, and then you have those beautiful berries later in the summer. And the way I treat this plant is I look at it and I go take, all right, the way it grows, it comes up in a nice oval, arcing, kind of half circle look. I'm trying to describe this on radio. It's so much easier doing TV.
Mm-hmm. I would say a rangy weeping habit is how I would describe it.
That's a good one. And what you can do is, again, think of my stained glass windows. I love stained glass. Think of the windows. And I go in and I remove a stem down to the bottom here and there. Again, leaving my 1-inch stub. And again, reminding myself how small 1 inch is. But I remove a piece here and there to keep that air circulation inside. It's really hard when to prune this, because if you prune it very severely in the spring, it's going to set back your flowering. It's going to set back your fruiting. So I constantly go in every year and just take 2 or 3, 4 or 5 branches out to initiate new growth from the inside. So I'm constantly replenishing every year new growth into this plant. And it's worked well for me doing it that way. How do you prune yours, Kathy?
Yeah, I tend to take some of the whips, as I call them, all the way back, because it can be a bit of a rangy grower. Like throwing up one this way, one that way. So if you don't have the space, if you're like me in a small urban garden, you have to be a little more selective in the pruning of this plant. And still get plenty of berries, plenty of flowering, but I'm usually taking out whole branches back down to the base.
Yeah, and so we're doing the same thing. You're choosing the longer ones, where I'm going in and going, okay, I'm being more selective to be choosing from throughout the plant rather than just going, oh, this is the real long one. But I don't have a space constraint, but you do. So see, again, pruning needs to meet the need of the space that we have. I mean, we prune because the plants, oftentimes we should be pruning to get the deadwood out, and then also to prune to meet the need of our landscape if our choice wasn't made. And also to, directional prune, and also sometimes for pruning out diseases and pruning out an insect infested area. Like, if something comes in and really wreaks havoc in one part of a shrub, I'll carefully prune that out before it infects the whole plant, particularly with rose bushes. I'm not saying with woody plants, but with rose bushes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of another native plant that can get quickly out of control, that I see a lot of people not even touching. For some reason, I think they're afraid to cut it, which is the Carolina allspice.
Oh, yes. That one there, it's a plant that wanders. It creates thickets in the wild. And so what I have done just this year was we climbed into that thicket and dug up all of the, I'll say, satellite plants that have emerged. That's the best way for me to describe these, because as underground runners, and then it shoots up a new plant. And it's been in the ground 10 years at my house. And so we went around this winter where we could see things, and we got it back to what I want to say is the original strongest part of existing plant that I put in. And then what I did, after removing all of those, because those are independent plants unto themselves, I went in and, like you, whatever the tallest ones were, I went down to the bottom and removed those to give all the other small suckers a chance to come up and to grow and to make that shrub. Suckers come from the roots. Water sprouts come from other branches. All right. So suckers, we want those growth, and particularly in this plant, the word sucker is appropriate, to be able to thin it out some so that you can get the sun and light in there to initiate more new growth. But yeah, sometimes you just have to go in and cut back those wandering new plants that come in. Pot it up and give it to a friend. It's a great way to make a new friend smile. Say, hey, new gardening friend, here's a new plant for you.
Yeah, that was going to be my advice, was to dig and divide with a sharp spade, like a razor spade, some of those rooted sections, and pass it along.
Exactly. It's a pass along plant.
Definitely. And another native I think that behaves similarly, making a thicket like that, is our red twig dogwood.
Oh, yes, yes. I have a problem with those down here. My soil is too heavy. It's just too heavy of a clay. But when I lived in New York many years ago, they're all over the place because the soil is perfect for them. They need a very humusy soil, very well-drained, high, rich in organic matter soil. And the way I address those is I want that beautiful red growth down in my garden. These plants reach 30 feet tall. And so what you do is every other year I knock it down. Actually, my sister does. She has them up in her garden. But you cut it down pretty severely about this time of year, March, April. And then it will regrow and we'll have nice, beautiful red shoots come up, which will be gorgeous in the wintertime. And then the next year they'll get a little taller. And that's when I come and I cut them down again. And again, it starts to range out. It likes to make thickets again. So every now and then you've got to get that shovel and cut out the new ones that are emerging. Or do some evaluation and say, is the mother plant getting tired? Is it getting old? Do I need to take a younger plant and move it into its place? Which if that happens, then I always add a lot of organic matter in just to, I'll say, rejuvenate the soil too. But it's a great plant. Just understand if you let it be, it will be very, very tall. And all those beautiful red shoots will be way up in the sky. So yes, it's a plant we are forcing to keep small so we can enjoy the beautiful part of it, which are those stems.
Mm-hmm. And should we note, as a side note, that there is a yellow version of red twig dogwood. The name is a little bit of a misnomer sometimes.
Yes, yes. Read that tag and keep it. Get that shoebox.
Mm.
But in this case, I think you can remember just by looking at it.
And I think the last one I'll ask you about is our native hollies. So the ilex that are deciduous, so they drop their leaves, they're not evergreen, our native one, and then you have the berries along usually the top third of the stems.
Yes, exactly. This is Ilex verticillata and Ilex decidua, our winterberry and our possum haw. And the decidua takes more moisture than the verticillata. So if you have a very wet area, go buy some Ilex decidua. Again, right plant, right place. We have so many different cultivars, some growing 3 feet, some growing up to 12 feet. And there's so much to choose from. I love the fact that we have introduced, I'll say, more landscape-friendly plants, so that people can grow these in their garden and enjoy those gorgeous red berries. The one that, the verticillata taking a little more dry than the decidua taking a little more moist. But still, they're great garden plants to have. This is a plant that you don't want to cut severely. You don't want to make it stay at its height because you want to have those. This is a woody plant, all right? It takes time for it to mature to start flowering, being a holly. And then once the flowers are now pollinated, by a nearby male plant. Hollies are dioecious, meaning we have a female plant and a male plant. So if you buy a female holly, a female one thinking you're going to get berries, you have to buy the guy to go with it. All right, you need to buy 2 plants to get those red berries. Still, pruning them again, I'm taking out the larger, taller pieces down to the bottom. I'm only removing 25%, which might be 2 cuts, and that's it. It's got slow boat to China here. So you've got to just take your time with it. If you want to shear it off at the ground and have it start again, that's a choice too, but it's pretty severe. It's going to be a while before it gets to the point where you'll get flowers and berries again. But if kind of like pruning a lilac, for those who can grow our lilacs, go in there and take the taller pieces out down to the ground, make angular cuts so that the water flows away from them and doesn't puddle at the top of the new cut, the cut stem. And and enjoy it that way. This way you're pulling back the height if you need to, or maybe making it a little more narrow. But above and beyond everything, get the right plant. If you only have room for a 5 to 7 foot plant, buy a cultivar that grows 5 to 7 feet.
Great advice, Peggy. Thank you so much for sharing those spring pruning tips.
Well, thank you for having me, Kathy. It's always a joy to talk to you, and I love sharing what I've learned. It really is. And the more I can share that, the more I smile, because I want people to be successful. My motto is, you can do this too.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy, Jentz, and Teri Speight, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Horsetail plant profile. Horsetail, Equisetum prealtum, formerly Equisetum hyemale, is a perennial plant that looks like a reed with joints along its stem. It can grow to 3 to 6 feet tall and is also known as scouring rush. It is hardy to USDA zones 4 to 10, and it's native to most of North America. Horsetail is a fern relative and does not produce flowers or seeds. It can be propagated by division. It prefers to grow in sites with consistent moisture. It can thrive in full sun to part shade. Horsetail is often found in wetlands and places with shallow water. It's best grown in a home garden, either in a container or at the edge of a pond or water garden, as it can be an aggressive spreader when planted in a wet soil location and quickly forms a large colony. Due to its rough texture and high silica content, the plant is not eaten by deer. Horsetail, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm so enjoying the flowers on my wild violets, serviceberry, lilacs, and flowering almond. Over at the community garden plot, the peas have finally sprouted. And speaking of peas, one of the garden tips that we shared on our social media this week was to plant a few extra peas so that you can harvest them early just for their tender shoots and tendrils. Once the plants are over 6 inches tall, you can start snipping off the top growth to enjoy in salads and stir fry. In local gardening events, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, you might want to attend the Tacoma Horticultural Club's April meeting. That's on Wednesday, April 16th at 7:30 p.m. at Historic Tacoma in Tacoma Park, Maryland. The meeting is free and open to all. The topic is Managing Garden Pests, and the speaker is Marie Rojas. She'll touch on overall integrated pest management principles as they pertain to home gardens, and then go over some of the common pests in our area and what to do about them. On Saturday, April 19th, at the Glen Carlin Library Demonstration Garden, they are holding their annual spring celebration and plant sale. This is from 9 to 3 p.m., rain or shine, on South Kensington Street in Arlington, Virginia. An abundance of nature-related activities and products will be available. An educational tree walk will start at 1 p.m., and Small Trees Make Big Canopies program will be giving away saplings during the event. You can find out more about that at glencarlinlibrarygarden@gmail.com. That same Saturday, April 19th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., with rain dates of April 26th and 27th, will be an azalea plant sale by the Northern Virginia chapter of the Azalea Society of America at Meadowlark Botanical Gardens in Vienna, Virginia. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Green Prints with the last word on the Great Plant Swap Mishap, a story by Joanna Gelbrand. Every year I attend a big plant swap in a neighboring town hosted by a group of gardeners I affectionately call the Ladies. This dedicated group is known for their strong opinions, generosity, and their eco-conscious, anti-box store plant stance. Their mantra, "Is it native, organically grown?" sometimes feels overwhelming, but I love gardening and free plants. I'm always on the lookout for perennials for the school garden I tend, my in-laws' garden, friends' gardens, and of course my own. Plant swaps are typically wholesome, community-minded gatherings. The idea is simple. You bring a plant, you take a plant. Newcomers are even welcome to take plants without bringing any. Experienced gardeners eagerly offer advice, creating a buzz of excitement and camaraderie. Try grouping irises with daylilies for months of blooms, or watch out for the aggressive gooseneck loosestrife echoes through the air. It's a delightful event, but for me, it's also fraught with tension, from finding a parking spot to the fear of missing out on the best plants. Last year, I was particularly stressed. The parking situation was dire, forcing me to park illegally with my hazards on. I hurriedly dropped off my plant donations, chives, hyssopes, tall garden phlox, and Siberian iris before grabbing some lamb's ear and rushing back to the car. With my second empty box, I returned to more thoroughly browse. Among my donations was a seedling I couldn't identify, which I labeled mystery plant. As I was examining the shade plants section, I heard a woman exclaim, "Oh my God, who brought this?" She waved my mystery plant in the air, declaring it a noxious weed. A crowd gathered as she identified it as bittersweet, pointing out its telltale red roots. The murmurs of the crowd grew into a chant, "Weed, weed, weed." The scene turned hostile, with the plant in its pot discarded on the ground. Mortified, I didn't dare to claim the plant. I slunk back to my car, deeply embarrassed and rattled. I questioned whether the plant was actually bittersweet or possibly another invasive vine, but the humiliation was real. Couldn't the woman have handled it more discreetly? As I sat in my car, the chant, "Weed, weed," still echoing in my mind, I reflected on how quickly a friendly gathering had turned ugly. Despite the ordeal, I was already looking forward to planting my new lamb's ear. Maybe next year, I'd skip the mystery plant and stick to the basics. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprints.com.
Thank you for listening to Garden DC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.